This is the way. Jesus is coming soon. For your life, we will be there. What will signs? All the days shall see in the sky. For we know one and goodbye. Trouble soon be back forever. Bring me on my soul, bring on find nothing in the sky, and this world would only they will find glory to share. Jesus is coming soon, for your life, me will be there. Trumpets will sound, all the dead shall rise. The angels skies, for we know when one dies, ever bound. I'm going to call this lesson Lessons from my Airplane. I guess most of y'all know that I went to Vegas last week. I never thought I wanted to go to Vegas. Never had a desire to go to Vegas because I heard nothing good. It's called Sin City and all that. But it was really pretty neat as far as, we walked down the strip and saw the fountains and walked in all the themed hotels and the lights and everything. So there was a lot of neat stuff. And I didn't really see a lot of the stuff that I was afraid I might see. But Dustin and his girlfriend Emma, he told me a while back, a couple months ago maybe, that they were going to get married and they were going to go to Vegas and elope, and I couldn't tell anybody. So I said, okay, I'm in. I was just glad they told me. And so it was me and her parents and one of his closest friends. And so we all went out there, and the wedding, they booked a place in the mountains that was about 45-minute drive away. It was really pretty. It was a mountain of scenery and everything, and it was really classy. I mean, he didn't want the Vegas wedding type thing, so I thought they did really good. But I knew when we went out there that I didn't really but I got choked up a few times. But I after they got married, they rode back with me back to Vegas, and so I used that time to. Of course, we talked about how we miss Lisa and how wish she was there and everything. And so, yeah, it was a lot of emotions and stuff. But it caused me to think about all the things that I've been blessed to do in my life and to see, and how quickly time's passed. And it made me think about my wedding and when I was young. And it's like, it just seems like no time. But it reminds me of James 4:14, which tells us that life is like a vapor. It's here for a little while, and then it vanishes away. Anytime I get on an airplane, I haven't flown very much, but anytime I get on an airplane, when it starts taxiing down that runway, I'm praying. I mean, it just unnerves me a little bit. So I pray for a safe flight, and it always humbles me, and it brings me closer to God. And it was just a good time to slow down and have spiritual thoughts. So I thought I'd share some of those thoughts tonight that had when I was on this trip. So, you know, we all have difficult days and difficult times in our life. And so when we was taking off on that plane, it was cloudy. I don't remember it raining or anything, but it was really cloudy that morning. And so when we got to the cruising altitude, we busted through those clouds, and it was just bright sunshine, and you could see all over the place. And you look down, and it kind of reminded me, you know, like if you put that in real life, it's like, you know, we can have cloudy days and all of that, but God's always there, and His light's always there. We just have to reach out to Him and bust through those clouds, and He's there if we just reach out to Him. And when the plane would ascend through those clouds or come back down, you know, to land and come through those clouds, it would shake and, you know, have that turbulence and kind of unnerve you a little bit. And, you know, that kind of reminded me of the storms in our lives and how they shake us up. We just got to remember, we just got to hold on, push through those clouds, and remember that God's in control, and He's always up there. So we just need to remember that God has power over them. And let's look at Mark 4:35 through 41. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, Lord, let's cross over to the other side. And when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat, and they took him along in the boat as he was, and the other little boat were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so it was already filling. But he was in the storm, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said, Why are you so fearful? Is it you that have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who could this be that even the wind and the clouds obey him? You know, it amazes me that way back in the 30s, when we was looking at that Hoover Dam and seeing how massive it was and tall it was, and I really thought it would be bigger though, as far as what you see on TV. But it was pretty tall, but it wasn't as wide as I thought it was. But it amazes me that that thing was built in like the 1930s, and how we had the technology and that we could do that at that time. And then, you know, I thought, as looking around at all that scenery, I thought, you know, God's got the power. We're holding back that little bit of water, you know, and we think that's something, but you know, He covered everything we saw with water, and it's just when you think about that, it's just, you know, nothing in His eyes. But it was like a 45-minute drive from Las Vegas to Hoover Dam, and then probably another hour and a half to the Grand Canyon. And when we were coming home, I mean, and the Grand Canyon was everything that they said it was. You know, it was neat, and it really you know, makes you think about how, you know, just how majestic and how God can create all this, and it's pretty neat. But when we was coming home, I got on the plane, and it wasn't a cloud in the sky that day, and we had drove all that way to go to the Grand Canyon and Hoover Dam, and just probably 5 minutes after the plane got up, I could see Hoover Dam out of the window. I thought, well, there it is. And then it was another 5 minutes, and there was the Grand Canyon, and way up in the sky, and seeing how big it was and everything. It's pretty amazing to see all that from the airplane. But, you know, as I looked from the airplane into the Grand Canyon, I thought, you know, somebody could be down there, and to them, you know, they're just a speck down in there, being swallowed up by that massive thing. But you know, God's still up there, and all they have to do is, you know, reach for Him. He knows where they're at and everything. And Psalm 40, 1 through 3 says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of the horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon the rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth. Praise to our God. Many will see and fear and will trust the Lord. So as I was on that flight home, I just stared out the window. Like I said, it was just, you could just see forever, and it was cloudless. And I for some reason when I got home, I looked at my app and I let them just pick my seats. So I didn't know where I was going to land, but it's like $15 I could upgrade to a window seat. So I did that, and I was so glad that I did, because I just stared out that window for like 2 hours. I mean, I'm not used to flying, so it was pretty amazing to me. But what got me was, I looked out and I could see all the changes. You could see when we first left, it was just crevices and canyons and stuff, and then it changed to like sand and desert, and then it would you could see where the land would come up maybe a couple of 100 feet, it looked like, and then just be plains and just solid sand. And then as we got closer to home, everything started getting green. And it made me think, we're so hard to please and everything. It's like God's like, well, we're going to make sure everybody's got something to, enjoy. And so he gave us so many different things to see. It was just like a work of art as you look down, just like a painting, and a mural. But so as I looked down his handiwork, I got to thinking about my life, and I pondered about how much time I had left. I mean, don't always think about those things, but it just, I had a peace for some reason. It's just I thought, I felt complete, and I felt close to God, and I thought, if this plane goes down right now, or if I don't make it home, it was just a peace, and that's something that I think that you can only get through God. 2 Thessalonians 3:16 tells us that the Lord tells us Jesus is the Lord of peace, and He give us peace in any way. And it cut out my rest. I had a couple of other little things, but anyway, it's we can find peace through the Lord. And in summary, my takeaway was just that God is so big and we are so little, but He created all this for us. It reminded me of that Randy Travis song that my love is deeper than the oceans. God is there and He'll hear our cry. James 4 verse 8 says, draw near to God. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and He will lift you up. So if there's anybody here tonight that needs the prayers of the church or would like to bring Christ into their lives, you can come forward now as we sing.
Days are filled with sorrow and care, hearts are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Jesus is very near. Cast your care on Jesus today. Leave your worry and fear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary.
Sweet man, you got the string going. That has been the trick. Thanks so much, Derek. That was great. I can just listen to that all night. That took up the whole time. I think it would have been time well spent that share. John chapter 19. We'll continue our study of John. So we were, if it takes us, I don't know. I'm not really in a rush to get through this section. This is really, the sort of the pinnacle of the book, Crucifixion of Jesus. Last time we got down to around 12 and 13. Pilate pronounces judgment on Jesus, and he brings him out again in verse 14. He says around the 6th hour, so this is about noon. And he says, "Behold your king." And they say, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. That's really an amazing statement coming from the chief priests, that we have no king but Caesar. Really incomprehensible almost, I think. I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
They were arguing previously about not paying taxes.
Yeah, that's true.
Now they're like, okay,
That's so true. They were trying to trap Jesus and say, "Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar?" They're only, they're only saying what they feel like they have to say to get Pilate to go along with their plan. I don't think they really believe this, but it might be truer than they admitted, whether they realize it or not. They don't have any real loyalty to God, and certainly not to God's Son, the rightful King. Anybody else on that part? So it says, so they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which is in Aramaic called Golgotha. We know in the other gospel accounts that they had to compel one, Simon of Cyrene, to carry the cross of Jesus. And I remember one time I got to looking for the passage where it says he stumbled underneath the cross. It doesn't say that anywhere. That's just assumed. Because why else? He's obviously starts out carrying his cross, and why else would they get someone else to carry it unless he was physically not able to do it? So it's assumed that at some point he wasn't able to finish that journey down from Jerusalem across the brook and then up to the place of the execution. In verse 18, there they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. What's the significance of the fact that Jesus was crucified with 2 other people? I would suggest that it fulfills the prophecy that he was numbered with the transgressors. He was treated as a common criminal. I was looking back at Isaiah 53. It's there somewhere that but he was numbered with the transgressors. He was just treated as a common criminal. This wasn't some special treatment that Jesus was getting, or he wasn't given, it was the lowest of the low, and he's just executed along with 2 other guys that were being executed that day, just right in the middle of them, like even in his execution, there was nothing special. No, it was just common and ordinary and terrible. Verse 19, Pilate wrote an inscription and put it on the cross, and it read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. I believe it was common to write someone's charge. I mean, that would make sense. So people, passersby would know this guy was a murderer. This guy, what did they do that they're being executed for, to kind of use this to get other people not to commit any crimes. But remember that Pilate had examined him and found no guilt in him. In fact, he didn't know why he was being killed. He didn't know why Jesus was being crucified. I mean, he probably figured out it was out of envy or something, but he has nothing to explain why, what crime is he being committed for? He's being crucified for the crime of being king of the Jews, is what he's saying, which is, of course, a slight on the Jewish leadership. I think he's doing that just to barb them, just to poke at them. But it's actually true. Jesus is being crucified because he's the king of the Jews. I mean, what he's being crucified for is they rejected their king. Verse 20 tells us they read this because it was near the city. It was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priest said to Pilate, don't write the king of the Jews. Rather, this man said, I'm the king of the Jews. But Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. So he wouldn't change it for them. Any thoughts or comments down through 22?
Was that, you think the sequencing was before they left where Pilate was and he started the walk to Golgotha? Was that inscribed on the cross, or was that done when they arrived? In other words, Pilate, I can't see Pilate following them out there. I think his command, and it was written on the cross. I don't believe he was present.
I never thought about that, Jim. That's a good question. So I don't know if they ran back to him and said, hey, change what you wrote, or if they saw it before he went.
Well, 19 said Pilate had a notice prepared,
Mm-hmm.
fastened to the top.
Mm-hmm. Ahead of time, yeah. Yeah. And maybe I don't know whether they saw it when they finally raised him up and then they were like, no, that's not right. Or if they saw it ahead. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Exactly when does that conversation take place with him? Was it before or after he was crucified? I'm not sure. I've read that the part of the cross that they would have carried was the cross being called the patibulum, and it was, so like today you think of the pictures you see as the crosses like this, and you're dragging the whole thing. And that might be, I don't know. I don't think they always did it the same. I mean, it wasn't something that there was a specific procedure. It's pretty gruesome and crude thing. So that probably they wouldn't always necessarily have to do it the same. But what I read was that the cross, the part that you would be attached to, that you would carry that part, but it doesn't really change anything. Yes.
There's a lot of stuff, when we were doing the class on this, I read a lot of stuff, and I don't remember it all, I don't have it with me, but, we don't really think about all the torture and the things that he went through, but like the crucifixion itself, if it's not bad enough being nailed to the cross, then they have to get the thing upright.
Right.
And things like that we don't often think about how horrible that's going to be, that you're nailed to a piece of wood. It's not sanded down and smooth. So, and then they're going to have to stand it up and get it into some kind of hole or something to hold it up where you're there. And so for anybody that goes, went through that, how terrible it is even after being nailed to the post, to get it upright and things like that. And
drop it in the hole.
Because you see people, y'all probably seen some of them there. There's a guy out toward Park City every now and then, and he's got his fancy little 4x4, nicely smooth on wheels that he'll, walk down the side of the highway. And it was nothing like that. It wasn't,
right.
It wasn't that what we try to make it out to be. It was terrible.
Terrible. Yes. Yes. Probably however bad you can imagine, I'm sure it was worse than that. However, I heard somebody say one time, I don't know, I remember this from a sermon when I was a kid, it just made an impression on me, that somebody somewhere had rigged up something like a cross and would allow people to, or obviously not be nailed to it, but you could be tied to it. So you would, let people experience this, if anybody wanted to, you could go up and they would tie your hands and then tie your feet to it, and then like let you see how long you could hang like that. And it like remarkably short period of time that somebody could stand that. They wouldn't last, minutes. It's like you couldn't. It was so incredibly uncomfortable and painful to be in that position, held in that way. So really hard to imagine, but there's nothing about that that's going to immediately kill you, and that's the torturous part of it. Like there's no, it's a slow dying process. That's why, for the criminals, they had to come break their legs to speed it up, and that was after hours of hanging that way because it's not immediately lethal.
So you can suffocate.
Right. So verse 23, when the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, and also his tunic. His tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Before we get to the prophecy and the fulfillment of it, there's another piece of this that's we don't always think about, and that is that he was stripped to be crucified as well. So the 2 garments they're talking about was the outer garment and the inner garment. And from what I've read, we don't know for sure whether they gave him anything to protect his modesty at all, like a piece of cloth, or not. But certainly for Jews of that day, they were always dressed, and they didn't go around wearing what you think of, the way you see some people today. But I mean, Jesus would have been covered up, his whole life, and then now to have basically all of his clothes removed, again, whether something was given to cover up, the extreme, or not, we don't know. But just a short time after this, you see down there that his standing by the cross, verse 25, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene, his mom, his aunt, these 2 other ladies, and then not to mention the public passing by. So when you think about, it says Jesus despised the shame of the cross. There's so many things about that were shameful. The very fact of being crucified as a criminal is shameful. The abuse that he received, the insults, the spitting, and all of that, horrible treatment. But I suspect that for most any God-fearing Jew of that time, to be publicly stripped, practically naked, and raised up on display in front of your family, in front of your mom and your aunt and everybody else passing by, would have added to the humiliation and the shame of the whole experience.
Eric, it's hard to read through, and particularly to me in Matthew's account, the detail of how they persecuted him on the cross and what they did and how they blasphemed and spit at him at the time. And there were women apparently watching him or there at the time. And he didn't say anything. And he hung on that cross a long time, because in Matthew's account it says from the 6th hour to the 9th hour there was darkness, and then he said something. He was up there for an hour on that. Incidentally, we're talking about a while ago the writing up there, and while it wouldn't, I agree that Pilate probably wasn't, or you wouldn't think he would even be out there at that time. But it says when they put him on the cross and they divided his garments at that time, it says in verse 36 in chapter 27, sitting down, they kept watch over him there, and they put up over his head the accusation written against him.
Okay.
This is Jesus, King of the Jews. And from there, it just got worse.
they just kept on. And it says two robbers were there, and they blasphemed him, and wagged, people walking by wagged their heads, and made fun of the statement that he'd made about tearing down destroying the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. And on it goes. But the chief priests, and that's a point I really wanted to make, how they persecuted him, and we talked about what a statement it was for them to say the only king we have is Caesar. And here they are again in verse 41 in Matthew. Likewise, the chief priests mocking him with scribes and elders said, he saved others, but himself he cannot save. They're still making fun, and it's the chief priests of all people that God had given them the instruction, and they were supposed to be the teachers and the leaders, and here they are saying, making fun of him. And it really is a horrible thing to think about it. And we see today, reenactments of all kinds of things hanging on the cross, but none of them are really as descriptive as the scripture itself as to what they did to him. And he was alive for part of a long part of that time when they were doing all of that, hanging on a cross for hours, and the way they treated him with the message, and actually saying he can't save himself and all that. Of course, now a little opinion, conjecture on my part. Boy, they didn't get by with that very long. There was darkness pretty soon, and when he died, the rocks split, and there were earthquakes. Somebody woke up about that time as to what had happened there, and that's not described. It's not. We didn't spend a lot of time on that. We'll get to some of that later, but you would think their whole lives they had studied the law, and then they saw him for 2 or 3 years, and unless they wanted to keep the power, they just couldn't understand or didn't understand the change and who he was, to the point that they degraded him beyond what we could believe. It's hard to even read it.
Mm. Yes, agreed. Very, very difficult. Anybody else? So, John tells us that this was to fulfill a prophecy from Psalm 22, the same psalm that Jesus quotes from. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's how it begins. But later in the psalm, it says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Kind of a remarkable prophecy, because in and of itself, it sounds contradictory. If you take the clothing and divide it up among yourselves, then that's that. There's nothing to cast lots for. So how would they divide his clothing and cast lots? That's an odd thing to say. But the fulfillment of it is remarkable, because his outer garment, which had seams, they ripped into pieces. And then I don't know what good that would do to them, but they had a piece of cloth now. I'm thinking like shop rags or something. I mean, what are you going to do with a piece of cloth, a torn thing? But then the inner garment was woven from top to bottom in one piece. Somebody put a lot of time and effort into making that, and then when they recognized that, they thought it would be a shame to tear it apart. So they decided, okay, we won't rip this one up. Let's cast lots to see who gets to keep that part. And makes me think that perhaps some woman who cared for Jesus had probably made that for him. This woven from top to bottom, all in one piece, all one thing. And but anyway, the fact that they tore up the outer one and split it between them, and then the inner one they decided, let's don't tear that up, and they cast lots. That's just such a meaningless, kind of seemingly meaningless little detail about these guys that are so callous to what's going on that they're down there trying to figure out how to divide up the clothes, and somebody's dying, but they've probably done this who knows how many times. And But they don't realize that that all had been exactly prophesied, 1,000 years before in a Psalm of David. And that's really remarkable. Thoughts about that? The clothing and casting lots, dividing it? It says, so the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. And to his disciple, behold your mother. From that hour, the disciple took him to his own home. Thoughts about Jesus and his mother and this disciple whom he loves. We assume that's John, the author of the book, who is unnamed in the book, but everybody's kind of deduced that it's most likely John. Didn't Jesus have brothers? So why does he leave Mary in the care of John, would you say?
Maybe John could, better job of caring for her, plus John must have been more spiritual for a long time.
Yeah. And what'd you say, sir?
Because brothers not both.
Right. At this point, there's the indication is his brothers did not yet believe. So earlier in the book, a few chapters back, when he was going to Jerusalem, they're like, hey, don't you want to show yourself to the world? It says, for even his brothers didn't believe in him. Now, later in Acts 1, there's going to be some brothers of Jesus that do believe. The difference between here and there is the resurrection, I think. I think the resurrection changed everything for them. I think that it opened their eyes to who Jesus was. But at this moment in time, the indication is his brothers did not believe in him. But his mother did, and John did. And so he, seems to say, he will take care of her. And in fact, it says John took her into his home. Yes, and apparently, obviously, I don't read the Greek, but from what I have read, each of these statements that Jesus makes, like even though it says here, "Woman, behold your son," I think it's like 2 words in Greek, like woman, son, woman, and a little bit later, I thirst, and it is finished. Like each of these was like a burst, So if you can imagine somebody having to, gather up the energy to be able to speak, under the circumstances, you wouldn't talk and talk, you would just say these, because he's in extreme agony and it's hard to breathe. And so it's probably just very, very, 1 or 2 word statements. Also shows Jesus is, I don't know how many of us would be thinking about those kind of things in that moment, but he's thinking about others all the way to the end. John doesn't record it, but we know he talks to the thief beside him. He's thinking about him. He asked God to forgive those who were driving the nails. He's thinking about others, as long as he's alive, he's thinking about others. And here with, as he's nearly dead, he's thinking about his mother, and that's just who Jesus was in the extreme, put the cares of others ahead of yourself. Paul later tells us, to have this mind in you, which was yours in Christ, who, he gives us this example of putting others ahead of yourself.
Hey, Eric, I used to look at this like when I was younger, like you look at art and it's like a big picture, and like he's like the cross is tall and far away. But I heard a preacher once talking about really it's an intimate picture. Like they're not hanging. He's talking to his mom. He's not up on a hill far away. Like this is all very close, and it's you talk about like the nakedness. I mean, it's one thing if he was far. I mean, but it's like everything's happening in this small setting where he wasn't yelling, "Behold thy son." I mean, it was probably, and I think like when I heard that, I was like, oh, because you picture it this place with the skull, but it's very. So I mean, the teasing is there, the hitting is there, everything is the small confined.
Mm. Yeah. Yep. And we'll see that here in a second when, if we may not get to it tonight, but, John's going to say when they pierced his side, the one who's writing this was standing there. So, like, he wasn't, like you said, watching this from, like, a distance, but was, there to see it up close. And his mother's close enough that he could speak to her and talk to her. And so, yeah, that's a good point.
There's kind of like Stephen also, when he was doing stuff,
Mhm.
he would know it against the enemy.
Yeah. Learned that from Jesus, I'm sure. That's right. Verse 28, after this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill Scripture, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. We got a few minutes. Let's turn to Psalm 69 and see what this is referring to. It's really just verse 21, but I think we could back up and get more of it. Verse 16 through 21. Would someone like to read that?
Answer me, O Lord, for your steadfast love is good. According to your abundant mercy, turn to me. Hide not your face from your servant, for I am in distress. Make haste to answer me. Draw near to my soul, redeem me, and ransom me because of my enemies. You know my reproach and my shame and my dishonor. My foes are all known to you. Reproaches have broken my heart, so that I am in despair. I looked for pity, but there was none. For comforters, but I found none. They gave me poison for food, and for my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink.
So, when you get that context to it, if you just read the part, they gave me sour wine to drink, I mean, that's the fulfillment, I think, that's referred to. But when you back up and look at what's going on here, it's heartbreaking that he says, verse 20, reproaches have broken my heart. I'm in despair. I looked for pity, and there was none. For comforters, I found none. There was, just adding to the suffering that Jesus had to endure. And he was aware, of course, as all this is happening, this was foretold. This was the plan. This was his Father's will. This was written. And it had to be this way. And that's what he had to experience. And so it sounds like, if I understand what John is saying, when he's saying, I thirst, he wasn't really seeking for some relief, but instead was fulfilling the prophecy that they would give him the sour wine to drink. And they did. And then he tasted it. And then he, so he wasn't, really, it probably didn't bring very much comfort to his situation.
I think you're right on that, because at the end of Luke, isn't it where he tells us that all things that were prophesied him in the law of Moses that he had to fulfill, and that they were witnesses to it? He's telling them after the resurrection that, I had to do these things, all these things had to take place, or whatever, you got to witness it. So that's his own words. Anything that was said about his death in the old law that he had to be fulfilled.
It all had to happen. So his final statement in verse 30, when Jesus received the sour wine, he said, it is finished, and he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Let's go back with 15 seconds ago. Let's go back to Isaiah 53. We'll pick up here with Jesus' side being pierced next Wednesday, Lord willing. Isaiah 53. It kind of depends on your translation how this reads. But I like the way that it reads in the ESV. I hope that they've got the sense of it correct. We look at verse 10 and 11. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of his anguish, out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be counted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. The part I wanted to highlight is verse 11, that out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. Perhaps as Jesus is completing his mission and his task, and he's able to finally say, "It is finished," there was some satisfaction in the fact that he had done the Father's will. He had done everything he was commanded. He fulfilled every prophecy. He had finished being the sacrifice. He had borne the sins of the world, and now it's over. And, we know that the Father rewarded him.
As a human, he's doing it. And that to me makes it even more difficult, putting myself in those shoes, and to be able to do those things and say those things, and to be able to say it's finished, but to go through that as a human being, not just the Son of God, but as somebody who is a human who's completing what the Father said to the nth degree. He didn't miss a word or anything about it.
Right. Amen. Well, take that with you this week, and we'll see you Sunday, Lord willing.
Hey, scroll down.